Welcome. This is the Nebraska School Library Association's Digital Citizenship Series. This is the third in our series, and we'll be getting started in just a moment as soon as I can start sharing my screen. All right, so a couple little housekeeping things before we get started in this workshop today. First thing I'd like to state is if you can watch this as a viewing party with a couple of colleagues or a handful of colleagues, this would be a great one to walk through with. There's going to be lots of opportunities for pausing and thinking. Also, before we get started, you might want to pause the video and take a moment to download the resources that are going to be linked in this whole presentation. So to do that, you can either scan that QR code that's on the screen, or you can go to the shortened or bit.ly, as it says there, on, there we go, let's get my screen. I'll get my little laser pointer going. That's on the screen right down here. You can access that, put that into your browser and be able to access today's handout that accompanies this session. The other thing to point out is our little guy over here. When you see this icon throughout the session today, you will know that that is a signal that you're going to want to pause the video so you can have some deeper conversations with your colleagues or just a reflection time for yourself as you think about some of the questions before moving on. All righty. So let's go ahead and get started. This is News Media Literacy, Preparing Students for Tomorrow's Headlines, Empowering Students with News Literacy, something I know that's near and dear to librarians everywhere. And this is a really important topic, especially right now with a lot of the turmoil going on in our country. Helping students be able to navigate through this is going to be really important. So let's go ahead and get started so you can learn more about how you might integrate some of these concepts from the lessons we're going to talk about. All right, just to give you a little background on myself, my name is Melissa Cleaver. I do work with Common Sense Media. I'm in the Common Sense Education Department, and I support the whole state of Nebraska inside of Omaha Public Schools. I also have a background that I have been an art educator and then a technology trainer for Omaha Public Schools. And so knowing how to utilize media is something that's really kind of been part of my background as well. All right, so let me give you a little backgrounder on Common Sense Media, speaking about backgrounds. Common Sense Media has actually three kind of pillars. We have the Common Sense Media, Common Sense Education, and Kids Action. And as it says here, we rate, we educate, and advocate. And so our ratings and reviews that many people are familiar with come from our Common Sense Media side. Common Sense Education is where all of our curriculum is listed and all kinds of other resources that we'll tap into today. And then we have a Common Sense Kids Action, which really helps take policies and make changes in policies. All right, so for our learning today, let's see what we're going to be diving into. I try to make this as much of an interactive workshop, even though this is a recording, and we're only going to be able to just kind of skim the surface and give you kind of an intro and a feel for what the content that we have to share is. And I'm hoping that this will help inspire you to have some deeper conversations in your school and with your students, and follow up on some of the resources that I share today, which you can always reach out to me and I can help support you with that as well. All right, so we're going to kind of dive into some teen news engagement and find out about a study that was recently done. We're also going to dive into a lesson called Is Breaking News Broken? And apply it to some somewhat current events. And then finally, we're going to review some resources that support media literacy skills and habits of mind. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means and help our students process any kind of breaking news. All right, so we know that young people are engaged in important political issues. You can see it clearly from some of these images. So this is not something new. They're there and they're present and they're engaged. So what really we need to be aware of is that a large majority of our teens ages from 13 to 17 say that it is important for them to follow current events. So kudos to all of our educators out there that have been helping inspire students to follow current events. To look at some of the key findings here, you can access, again, the links here in the handout to kind of dig deeper into this and take a look, but we're going to look at some of the data in just a moment. Okay, so what we've really learned from some teens and from the survey that was conducted is that seeing pictures and videos showing what happens seems to be really important to them. They prefer that visual content. And to be honest, so do I. I'm kind of a visual learner myself. And that they're getting most of their news from social media sites or even YouTube, rather than directly from news organizations themselves. And so that's an important thing to kind of point out and recognize about our students. This is a study, and again, you can get the link in the handout from Stanford's History Education Group on students in civic online reasoning. It's a really interesting study that looks at how students are really kind of lacking often some of these media literacy skills. And it has an interesting piece where they look at a mocked up website or page, and what seems to be maybe a newsworthy item is actually an advertising and all kinds of different things. And so dig into that to get some more information about how that has evolved in helping us understand what's happening with our students right now with their understanding of news and media. So what we are going to do now is dig in and kind of look at our own opinions and thoughts around what's challenging in discussing current events and politics in the classroom. So again, we won't be able to do a live poll right now since it's a recorded session, but if you would just take a moment to kind of think for yourself as to where do you land on this as far as the challenge with current events and politics in the classroom. What we've discovered is that most teachers are seeing the importance and the value of news and media literacy, but finding the challenge in having the conversations in the classroom. And from one of our on-site surveys that we did on our website, we asked educators what were those challenges. And as you can see here, breaking down, the largest challenge is around lack of student background knowledge. Next one, pretty high up there, is that polarized political climate. And so I'll just give you a moment here to review that. And so then what comes up then is we know that students are interested in news and that they're drawn in by images, which is more inviting to all of us, right? But what do they need to know? And what we have to understand is our role is providing the space to have these discussions and provide the students the skills to form their own informed analysis, okay? What we don't need to do is have all the answers. And I think this is where we get kind of stuck in things, is that we think that we have to have all the answers. I mean, we've been raised to know all the answers, especially in the classroom. So it's important to understand that this is not about a political debate in the classroom, but really about analyzing how the media is portrayed in current events. And therefore, our role becomes more about, again, providing that space to have these important discussions and to really help them build the skills for students to form their own informed decisions, help them develop those critical thinking skills, right? So again, it's not about the political debate. It's about helping them develop the analysis skills. And I think once we say that, it kind of takes the pressure off a little bit more. So let's dive in here. We have a lesson. And given that we've learned from how we can support our students in their media, we have this news media literacy toolkit that has been developed by Common Sense. And again, if you would like to access and dive into that toolkit, you can go to that link in the handout. And then this link will take you directly to this lesson, all right? So we know that the internet and social media give us tools to find out what's happening almost instantaneously, right? And sometimes even it's in real time. But how much can we really trust that breaking news that we see online? This lesson is really going to help students kind of think critically about that social media impact on things like our election, voting, and current events like what's happening right now. that can be pretty startling. All right, so let's dig into this lesson and just get a little bit of a taste of what it's about. So as kind of a anticipatory set or a hook at the beginning of the lesson, you might start off with this question. So I want you to take a moment and think about where you stand with agreeing or disagreeing on this statement that social media is a good place to share and find news or breaking news. Okay, so pause the video and have a little thought, or if you're in a group, have a little conversation right now. All right, welcome back. And so hopefully in some of your conversations or in your thoughts, you kind of addressed how anyone from being an accredited journalist or to being a citizen journalist or just somebody that happens to be at the right place at the right time with their smartphone can shed light on injustices or even some important events that sometimes our larger media outlets might struggle to cover or choose not to cover at all. So this can help make breaking news stories, and information in these kind of posts and reports can spread without fact checking, without editorial lenses, or even that journalistic ethics used in traditional news reporting. And this is what our teens are being exposed to as far as when they're gaining information in their news media outlets and social media feeds. Possibly another thing that you might have discussed in this agreeing and disagreeing is how what's trending isn't always what is most newsworthy. And often that's what's best adapted to our click and share culture, unfortunately. So therefore these things come up and people just click and share it without taking a moment to pause and really think of the implications or even really dig up, is this even valid? That's what I'm going to be sharing, which then adds to how social media can be a place where more misinformation or disinformation starts to be passed along. So in the lesson here, this lesson plan is going to help your students consider the unique challenges that social media presents and helping them find credible, accurate information, and just kind of raising that flag for them in understanding. Okay, so we know that the internet and social media gives us tools to find out what's happening almost instantaneously, sometimes even in real time. So leading up to things like our election or other kind of politically charged things, lots of posts tend to start to appear in news reports. But how much of that can really be trusted in these breaking news? So we're going to be watching a video in a minute here to kind of think about some of the thoughts and reactions and in regards to that topic or that concept. But before we do, I'm going to point out, and this is something that's in the lesson, is we have a document that has this activity. And as you watch the video, and you can either download the document, pause our video right now and get this document ready to go, or you can simply jot down these 3 questions or the icons to help kind of prompt you. So as you're watching the video, you're going to think about what you know about this topic. And the topic is, should we trust breaking news on social media? Things that puzzle me or questions that you still have, and then things that you'd still like to explore or know more about. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move forward. There's those icons and those kind of prompting questions. So normally this video is like a 5-minute video. We've got just a clip of it for you, just to know that if you use this with students. Okay, so go ahead and record your thoughts. And if you need to pause the video here and there to watch this and get your thoughts, go ahead and take the time to do that. All right, so here we go. Maybe I need to get my
Social media platforms are not necessarily the best place to find factual news or information. The problem problem is when there's something breaking, if there is some sort of emergency, if there's some sort of sensational moment that everybody's paying attention to, social media is where you go.
A lot of times your phone will suddenly seem to be blowing up, and these alerts are basically headlines of some big breaking thing on our Twitter feed and our Facebook feeds that are, of course, designed to attract your attention, much more so than deliver a kind of nuanced take on what's actually happening in the world. I've been a reporter for 33 years. Some mornings I wake up with my head spinning.
There's a lot to think about. Nobody wants to be misled. I think there's probably 4 tips I would say that are key, particularly going into the 2020 election. First up, be patient and don't rush to judgment.
Let stories settle in you. Think through, does this really make sense?
Refresh the story a couple hours later, a couple days later even, to try to make sure that you have the most complete picture of what happened.
Number 2, be responsible on social media and think before you share.
When you share content, even if you don't have a ton of followers, you never know how far the information that you put out is going to make it in the world.
It's worth just pausing for a beat and wondering, is this real?
Third, be skeptical of sensationalism.
The people who are running these platforms are trying to grab your attention.
You just read the headline, and the headline and the article don't match up, and so what you've just done at that point is you've shared something that's inaccurate or misleading. And then last, consider the source with any information that you're seeing.
As a journalist, it's the thing that I have spent the most amount of time doing is assessing sources. Think hard about the source. Has it earned your trust? What's really at stake right now is whether or not we're going to organize ourselves around facts, around truth, or are we going to organize ourselves around nonsense, around propaganda?
Because people are naturally inclined to share, they'll retweet, they'll reshare, they'll repost, and that will kind of perpetuate the garbage and actually create a lot of noise and a lot of confusion in those moments.
All right, so this, again, a great point if you want to pause and go through this chart and kind of go through some of the thoughts about these 3 icons here. Okay. All right, so now you've had a chance to kind of think of those 3 things about what's maybe puzzling you, what you thought you knew, and what you want to learn more about. Now I want to kind of shift and have you pause and think and have some discussions. If you are not watching this as a viewing party, then just pause and think and reflect a little bit here. And with students using this exercise or this activity, this might be the bulk of what you discuss. And we're just going to spend just a few minutes here, or hopefully you'll spend a few minutes with your groups or in your thought process, okay? But I want you to just kind of reflect on what are some of the benefits and dangers of reading breaking news about an election on social media. So again, if you're watching in a watch party, go ahead and pause and give each person about 1 minute in their group to kind of share their thoughts. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on and address maybe what some of the benefits and dangers that maybe came up in your conversation. A benefit is like the ability to be able to talk about police accountability and Black Lives Matter movement. Social media was helping get the word out about police brutality and highlighting some of the injustices that traditional media that wasn't maybe doing so. Something else that maybe comes up is that it can create complexity in a realm of justice, and we can see injustices and think about how we need to address them. In situations like disaster emergency, a benefit is that it's a great way to communicate and get what you need quickly. You know, finding out about the tragedy, the GoFundMe sites, the Help Me Right Now sites, so it's really a way to connect community together to address the situation or the emergency situation. Some of the dangers that maybe came up is algorithm not promoting the injustices, or rather that it's promoting the hatred, or breaking news that's amplified misinformation that's just getting shared further and further. For example, there was a shooting at YouTube headquarters years ago, and it was actually trolls and bots that saw that there was a shooting, and they immediately, these trolls and bots, put out fake images of the shooter and information. and just moments after something that happened. So again, they were trying to get that clickbait, that interest in their site, that kind of stuff. And what actually the situation was is that it wasn't, the image of the shooter was not accurate. It was actually a female shooter. I mean, it's just kind of sad that these bots kind of took over some of this. And this is where policy changes need to occur, but helping our students become aware of these types of things that are happening in these social media feeds. So take a moment and share a perspective that you didn't consider prior to your discussion when you broke off in your small groups, or maybe from what I just shared there, something that hadn't been thought of you. Take a moment to pause and think about that. And you might have noticed at the top of the page here, in a few places, we have some icons. We'll come back to talking a little bit more in depth about what those icons are kind of representing as we move forward. All right, so another activity in this lesson is to kind of really help them develop some skills and identify some different things is something you could do with a current event from social media that could even connect to your curriculum topics. So we're going to do some analyzing of some breaking news from a trending story that was in social media a few months ago, but fairly new and recent. This was a Twitter or a tweet that was posted. And what you're going to do in the lesson is have the kids look at this and try to identify what is it that they think they want to know about the topic, what's puzzling them or questions that they have, and have them really study this tweet and look at all the little bits of information that can be analyzed here as well as interpreted. And what can they glean from this, the information that's put onto that one little tweet. Okay, so maybe take 2 minutes and do this little exercise for yourself, and then start the video back up. All right, so as a result, what's trending isn't always what is most newsworthy. I think we've seen this time and time again. And often what's best adapted to our click and share culture. So I'd like you to kind of think back to, is there anything that puzzled you or that you had questions about the content from this post? And again, I want you to note up in the upper left corner that slow down symbol, because this question, posing it to our students, is going to link them to some skills that we're going to talk about here in a minute, or habits in mind. All right, so one thing that maybe you noticed with that tweet was how there was almost 10,000 retweets, 1,000 quotes from retweets. That could be pointing out some of the things that might be puzzling, whereas there was close to 12,000 likes. So let's take a look at resources for analyzing breaking news and trending stories. One of them that we'd like to share is this news literacy project called the SIFT. And if you're not familiar with this site, go ahead, and in your handout is a link to it. You can go dig in and take a look. They have a weekly newsletter that's sent out typically on Mondays that shares the latest examples of misinformation and disinformation. And it's a way to kind of highlight some of those stories and how they've gone sideways in a sense, right? You can subscribe to that trending stories, and this might be helpful for you to come up with something that is happening in the news right now, and giving your students the ability to kind of look through some of those newsletters or reports about some things that are sharing disinformation and misinformation. Okay, so going back to our little exercise we did as far as the tweet that we were looking at, this was tracked down as a false tweet, and that news media literacy project, they have the viral rumor rundown, and in it they'll kind of outline what made this false and how, things to identify to help kind of point that out. So for example, supporters of Antifa movement were not setting wildfires in the Pacific Northwest. One thing the SIFT did when they ran down this rumor is that it did have a few people that had been arrested for arson across the states in that region in that week. But at least 2 of those arrests weren't even connected to wildfires. So, some misinformation kind of being shared out in the tweet. No one of those arrests were associated with the Antifa movement specifically. And so you could go to the SIFT and kind of read a little bit more about the viral rundown. Those are a few of the things I just wanted to point out from that particular tweet or post, and how that worked with the viral rundown. Okay. So then what this prompts in your classroom conversation is, why would people even share this false and misleading information online? And so you want to kind of unpack that with them. Having conversations about people sharing false and misleading information by accident, or maybe they're doing it to make a point or to say something about themselves, or just because they think it's funny. And so kind of exploring and breaking down some of those reasons. In the lesson, there's an extension activity that you can have the students do a reflection activity that asks them to really scan their own social media feeds and observe the different types of breaking news that they're seeing. And then have them even take a moment to record their observations and consider how they might interpret what they're seeing differently if they look at it from another person's perspective, or even after completing this lesson, how they're maybe viewing some of those feeds or those posts on their own social media feeds. So the question comes for us as educators, then how can we best prepare our students for processing the news? And this takes us to what I was mentioning earlier, is that we need to teach students skills and habits of mind. And as I noted, I had you kind of observe the icons up in the top left corner. Well, each of those questions were kind of prompts that helped kind of associate with some of these habits and minds that we want to help create. For example, we want our students to learn how to slow down and self-reflect, not just click and share, right? We also want them to really dig in and seek facts and evidence. And what better group of people than librarians to help students recognize the need to seek facts and evidence and where they can do that, right? Next thing that we really want to help our students understand is how they can consider other people's perspectives, when they can walk a mile in somebody else's shoes a little bit, right? That helps to start helping them build the ability to envision a variety of options to a certain situation. And then finally, leading them into taking action. So again, these are the skills and the habits of mind that we're really trying to help develop with our kids, so that when they see these disturbing news media posts, they have a way to kind of process it. And all of these skills and habits of mind are integrated into our K-12 digital citizenship curriculum. We even have a particular session specifically, or a theme, all about news media literacy, called We Are Critical Thinkers and Creators. And it really helps, again, develop these. If you're not familiar with our curriculum, just a little background. This is all research-based curriculum made for K through 12. The research was done in partnership with Project Zero from the Harvard Graduate School. We completely redesigned and updated back in 2019, just a slight year ago, right? And every single bit of our curriculum is completely free on our website. You just need to log in and create an account so you can access the resources. And they do that just in order to kind of get a count of how many educators are accessing and using the resources. Also, things to know that we do offer our resources both in Spanish and English. And all the lesson materials are available through the Google Suite, so really adaptable for a lot of classrooms. And if you're not a Google Suite user, everything can be downloaded into a PowerPoint, Word document, all the Microsoft resources as well. And just a final little note that our curriculum does align with the U.S. education standards, such as ISTE standards, the English Language Arts standards, the California social and emotional learning standards, and then finally, the one that's near and dear to all your guys' hearts, the AASL standards. So it's good to know that you can find ways that this directly links to what you're doing in your curriculum with library services. All right, so again, the core question in the theme that's in the curriculum for news media literacy is just, how can I think critically about what I see and create? And in our lower grades, we focus on kind of the basic media literacy concepts about what media is and effective searching and creative credit. As they build up skills, they start to learn concepts that support news literacy, like identifying hoax, altered images and videos. They also then address copyright and creative credit. And finally, the dispositions, or those habits of minds that are integrated throughout the whole curriculum, or this particular theme specifically, is really focusing on seeking facts and evidence and envisioning options and considering perspectives. So all that's built into here, and we're going to kind of illustrate a little bit of that here. So in order to break that disinformation cycle, these are the things we want to, again, help them develop. Differentiating among facts and opinions. So again, helping them slow down is the habit we want them to develop. We want them to build facts and checking skills. And so that's part of our seeking evidence habit of mind that we want to have built. And then finally, helping them curate a diverse set of credible sources. And again, we know as librarians, you're going to have a great way to lead them to some of those great things. But one of the things that is helpful in this is considering others' perspectives is also going to help them be able to break down and look for some of those credible sources. And kind of recognizing their own confirmation bias. And the lessons really kind of dig into that. All right, so I'm just going to kind of show you a couple of the lessons that we have. And you can see on the page here that we have what the students will be able to do. And I've thrown on this first slide some of the icons that show those habits of mind that are developed in that particular curriculum. And again, to dive into the lesson, you can go to the handout that I've provided for you that you can click on and get that full lesson. But in this particular one, that's called Is Seeing Believing? And our big question is, why do people alter digital photos and videos? And in this, we explore how it's important for kids to know that images can be manipulated. Another one of our lessons is reading news online. And this is for grades 3 through 5. And here the skills that are developed are differentiating fact and fiction. And some of the habits of mind that they start to develop in this particular lesson is really about how to slow down. And then another one of the series, and there are others, but these are just kind of few that I wanted to highlight, is finding credible news. And the big question here is, how do we find credible information on the internet? This is a middle school lesson. Some of the skills that they develop in this particular lesson is about differentiating the facts from fiction. They're curating diverse sets of resources. And some of those habits of mind or dispositions they're learning about in this is considering others' perspectives. And so again, helping them develop those skills and habits of mind. All right, so that was our K-12 curriculum. We do have some additional resources that dive a little deeper into news media literacy. And I'm going to share a few of them with you here. I'm not going to go into them, but I just want to point out we have one of the lessons called Deep Fakes and Democracy, as you can see here. And you can access this link to go look at that resource a little bit more. In that one, there's kind of an exercise where they kind of go through, what do you see, how do you feel, what do you wonder, by viewing an image that has been doctored up. Some of you maybe saw this image years ago. I know when I came across this lesson, I was like, I didn't know that this was a fake image. I remember seeing that book turned upside down and thinking, wow, that's, you know. And as it turns out, if you go to Snoops, you can check this one about, fact check this about Bush with the upside down book and find out that this was doctored. And the lesson kind of goes into exploring these concepts. Another lesson we have is all about the October surprise. This is great during election years like the one we just had, and you can kind of talk about the impact that has and what news media happens in October. We have another one called Black Athletes and Activism. And this is kind of topical right now. And it's important to know that we have students critically think about how the media is covering events and how this might change over time, and highlight what coverage looks like. We do want to point out and reiterate that this is not about debating in a class, and we're not asking students to take positions when we have these conversations about some of these topics, but it's really about, again, asking them to examine the article and ask questions like, what is being presented? Why is it being presented? And who's presenting what? And just to kind of do that deeper dive into some of the news that's showing up. Kind of an extension to the example of the Black athletes activism is this lesson that's from the resource of Facing History. And you can go to the link here for this lesson and some of the student activities that associate with this. Some other resources that you'll find in that News Media Literacy Toolkit is all these different websites that have some really fantastic lessons. We've just mentioned the Facing History. We talked earlier about the News Media Literacy Project. To check out all those resources, again, in the handout, you can click on that and go find it directly. Another resource that we have available is our Young Voters Guide to Social Media News. And I just kind of want to sum up that, reminding that media literacy is not just important, it's an absolutely critical piece. It's going to make the difference between whether kids are a tool of the mass media or whether the mass media is a tool for kids to use. That comes from Linda Elderby. So in summary, today's session, well, I just want to remind us that it's, again, not about us having all the answers, but really about creating that safe space to practice and develop the skills and habits of mind on how to analyze news media. And again, we took a moment to understand teens' news engagement and what and how they're engaging with news. We took a moment to kind of dove into breaking news is broken lesson and kind of looked at how they could apply some of those skills that we want them to develop. And then finally, we looked at a variety of resources that can really support media literacy skills and habits of mind that we want our kids to be learning about. Okay. And that sums it up. If you have any questions at all, please don't hold back in reaching out to me. You can follow me on Twitter. I'll share often some of the resources that we have. And also, just if you have questions on how to utilize some of this, or if you have problems finding anything that you were looking for, please reach out. And before we shut things down for today, I just want to thank you for taking some time to learn a little bit more and develop yourself about news media literacy. And I would love some feedback. So you can either go to this URL that's on the screen or scan that QR code. Just make sure that you note that the region is Nebraska and the topic was news media literacy. And I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. And have a great one.